One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Concili Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm. Fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battle-Born Progress. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
With Annette. My name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battle-Born Progress. Tonight, we are talking about taxes. This week was tax day, and as you know, many of us pay way too much in taxes while billionaires pay virtually nothing. And so we believe that corporations and people who make billions of dollars should pay their fair share, just like I had to since I have no children. So with me tonight, I have Margarita George. She's with Healthcare for America Now, one of our fabulous sassy funders who I love hanging out with in Washington, D.C. when I go roll Easter eggs. Margarita is also working with us on our tax campaign, so excited to have her tonight. I also have my new board member and the Deputy Director of NSEA, Chris Daly, who is joining us tonight to talk about their new campaign here in Nevada. And in addition to that, why we should be looking at revenue and taxes in the state of Nevada and nationally. And then I have my dear friend, Ben Challenor with Faith in Action. He is working with us on our revenue campaign here in the state and is going to talk more about Nevada specifics. So excited to have you all. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you all for being returning guests tonight. So MJ, I want to come to you. I just want to talk generally. Why did we put all of this together? We had a press conference on Monday with Congresswoman Titus. We had a Congressman Horsford on as well, talking about this new initiative that President Biden is putting forward. And how much in taxes do the ultra rich pay in comparison to everyday working people like us?
That's a great question. So as you know, Annette, for many years of working together on healthcare and taxes, which are really two sides of the same coin. Tax day is my favorite holiday of the year because it allows us to help people understand that if you are a super rich person in the United States, so if you have $100 million or if you're a billionaire, you pay much less in taxes. You pay a lower tax rate generally than firefighters or nurses or accountants. And that's really just because of the many, many, many loopholes in the tax law that enable the ultra rich essentially to operate by a whole other set of rules than the rest of us do. So we put all of this together because for a couple of reasons. One, it's tax day, and we always love to celebrate tax day and use that opportunity to help people understand who's paying and who's not paying and how the rest of us pay when rich people don't. And then secondly, of course, here in Washington, D.C., we're about to go into what we think is the final stretch of legislating in Congress for a little bit, right? We have another opportunity, another bite at the apple at a reconciliation package. And some of the things in that package that are really important to people, like climate change provisions and healthcare and that kind of stuff, are popular, but we know that we won't get them unless they're paid for. And the best way to pay for them is by taxing rich people and corporations who for years have just gone without paying what they owe.
Absolutely. Well, both of our favorite holidays fall in 1 week. Yours is tax day, mine is 4/20. So happy holiday week, everyone. MJ, I want to talk about why it's so important to shed light on this, especially right now when we're seeing so much inequality in our country. I think there's obviously always been inequalities in our country, but I think the pandemic shined a light on that. And we saw Nevada billionaires specifically get richer during this pandemic, while many Nevadans lost their jobs and suffered during this pandemic in a bigger way than we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. So, how does Biden's BIT plan compare to Senator Warren and Wyden's plans? And what is the significance of the president including this in his budget?
Sure. I mean, obviously, there's always been rich people. And, the old saying, the rich get richer, it's true. But what's really unique about the moment that we're in is we've never seen rich people get this much richer while everybody else was getting poor. And the pandemic is a great example because during the pandemic, obviously, we had record job loss. We had millions upon millions of people lose their health care. We had almost 1 million small businesses close across the country. At the same time, billionaires actually increased in number. So we created more billionaires, and the existing billionaires nearly doubled their wealth, right? So that now post-pandemic, while everybody else has been recovering, billionaires, and that's 700 people, the 700 richest people in the country, control as much wealth by themselves, those 700 people, as the whole bottom half of the country. So that is a pretty intense concentration of wealth in very few hands. And aside from the fact that it's wacko and wrong that we have some people that can't afford to buy a house because interest is now 5%. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos is buying rocket ships. We also have the real challenge that when you have wealth concentrated in that way, it really poses some dangers to democracy. I think what's really historic about this moment, for 40 years, we've had trickle down, like basically my whole adult life. The economic paradigm in this country has been trickle down economics. We're going to give away a bunch of stuff to rich people, give them tax breaks, give them loopholes. And then the theory is like the rest of us will benefit because somehow it'll trickle down to us. Here's the good news about that. I guess we're slow learners in the United States, but in fact, that did not happen. There was no trickle down, and people were not better off because of that. And what's historic about President Biden and these other leaders in the House and Senate saying we need to finally tax billionaires, the growing number of billionaires, is that it's a complete reversal of where we have been for 40 years, and certainly a complete reversal of the last big tax debate that we had in the United States, which was the 2017 Trump tax law, right? That was the tax law that cut $400 billion out of healthcare to give 1.9 trillion in tax breaks to the rich and corporations. So this tax proposal that the president has put out that follows the proposal that Senator Wyden put out and last year's proposal from Senator Warren around wealth, it really is historic and revolutionary because it's taking us in a different direction than we've been traveling in for 40 years. And I would say a couple really important things to remember about the legislation. One reason that we don't tax wealthy people in America is because we don't really have a way to measure wealth. So think about that. That's cray, right? So, we don't have a way. We can measure income. So if you're a working person and you go to the job every day and, you collect a salary, we know how much you earn. We know if you get a promotion, you're going to owe that money to the IRS. But for wealthy people, one of the major problems in the tax system is that the IRS does not really have a way to track wealth, which then has led a lot of lawmakers to say, if we can't really figure how much it is, I guess we can't really tax people. So these proposals, all of these proposals sort of reject that out of hand and say, guess what? Like, this is the United States of America. We invented blue jeans and Coke. We can figure out a way to count wealth. And then we can figure out how to tax it. We should do that because we do it with everybody, right? We tax everybody's income. Everybody contributes in this country. So the proposals are revolutionary just in that respect because they create an opportunity finally to measure wealth and open up an opportunity to do other reforms down the line. So that's one key thing. And then the second thing that is really new and really revolutionary is most wealthy people make their money, they make their wealth off of gains from assets that they hold either in stocks or in other financial forms, right? So rich people aren't getting rich because they're going to the office every day and just making a big salary. Rich people are getting rich because they have stock and they have investments. And the gains on the stock market are what are inflating their wealth. Unlike us, right, regular people that collect a salary and pay taxes on our income, taxes on gains that you make on financial assets are not assessed until you sell the asset. So that means for a wealthy person, if they have a bonanza on the stock market, and a lot of them did during the pandemic, all of that increased wealth doesn't get taxed because we don't tax wealth like we tax work. It doesn't get taxed unless they sell the asset. Here's the thing, they don't sell their assets. They pass their assets on to their heirs. And so that's how you get this cycle of dynastic wealth, where wealthy people often don't pay taxes at all in their lifetime, and their descendants also don't pay taxes. So those key things are some of the key things that these bills address. They all address it in various different ways, but it's in there for each of those proposals. And that's what really kind of makes them revolutionary.
So Mike just texted me, MJ, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was we, heard a lot of whining this week by people on the right about, well, how are you going to determine who's wealthy and what does this mean? And oh, these poor billionaires, what are they going to do if they have to pay more in taxes? This is just so bad for Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. We should feel terrible for these poor rich people. Meanwhile, my neighbors losing their house and can't pay their bills, right? So, talk to us because Congresswoman Titus pointed this out this week. This has nothing to do with people who don't make a certain amount of money. This has everything to do with billionaires, people who are extremely wealthy, who I don't blame them for being wealthy, right? And I'm sure it makes their lives a lot easier, but they should pay their fair share just like the rest of us do in this country. And so should corporations for that matter. And when we talk about Nevada in a few minutes, we're going to talk about why corporations should also pay their fair share. So talk to us about like what it means for the average person and the average Nevadan who's just watching this show.
Yep. Well, I'm going to say the good news is no worries, rich people will still be super rich. So none of these taxes really impact, neither version of the billionaire's income tax, is going to affect people who have less than $100 million in wealth. And actually, Senator Wyden's only targets billionaires. So the good news is, of course, they've got plenty of money to pay their fair share. They'll still be paying less in tax, lower tax rates than the rest of us, but they'll finally have to pay some, right? So, and I think the stake for regular people is, I think sometimes regular people don't understand that rich people don't get rich on their own. right? Like, it's not like Elon Musk is like printing money in his basement, like he's selling a product, right? Like, so, same thing with, Bezos, right? Like, who doesn't love, a lot of people love Amazon, right? Like, a lot of people are subscribers. They love getting cat food delivered to their house. Like, it's the whole thing. So it's not like they're making this money and they are doing it on their own. And, the point here is that there's got to be, we want them to play by the same rules and contribute back. And when they do that, what happens is we can actually generate revenue. So the money that we're paying in taxes isn't just like going into the White House basement in the form of gold bullion. We are using it for things like healthcare and roads and jobs and the pandemic. And, look, the United States just had a bunch of historic moments, including one in which we created a vaccine in a year, which a lot of people experienced as a long time, but it's not. The average vaccine takes 7 years to complete. We did it in a year. And that was because we had $16 billion to deploy in the service of creating a vaccine. So to be able to have those things, to be able to have healthcare, to actually have better healthcare, right? Like, if we're ever going to get to the point in America where seniors can actually get dental, vision, and hearing covered under Medicare, great, right? Amazing. We could do that if we actually raise the revenue to do it. There's plenty of money. The problem is the tax system doesn't facilitate that money coming into the system for the people that are the best positioned to contribute. So everybody's got really, everybody who's listening to this show tonight, look, if you have traveled on a road, on a highway today, if your kid went to a public school today, if your kid's teacher stayed after to help tutor, if you went into an emergency room, if you have a parent in a nursing home, chances are that public money was involved, and we have that public money because of everybody in America who contributed back into the system by paying their taxes.
And I think that's a perfect segue for my dear friend, Chris Daly, who fights alongside me every single day in Nevada to ensure that corporations and people in Nevada are paying their fair share. So we have those nice things, because if you want nice things like a great education system, you kind of have to pay for it. So Chris, you work with the Nevada State Education Association, the affiliate of the National Education Association. So in the state of Nevada, when we're talking about taxes and revenue, we are the 5th lowest tax state in the country. We do not raise a whole lot of revenue, and our budgets are not very big here in the state of Nevada, and therefore things like public education often suffers. So how is revenue distributed to public education, and why does Nevada still fall short compared to other states in per pupil spending?
Thanks, Annette. I appreciate the segue into, because I was going to begin with, look, when we talk about taxes, we need to remember what tax dollars go to. And that's a lot of the things that we collectively care about, including public schools. And as you point out, due to Nevada's tax structure specifically, Nevada schools have been chronically underfunded. We're talking about over the course of decades. If you look at the National Education Association's ranking of the states, Nevada is currently 48th out of the states in per pupil funding, which means things like we have the largest class sizes in the country. It's also important to keep in mind that Nevada is a very diverse state. We're also a relatively low income state. So we have some of the highest concentrations of students who are at risk or English learners. And these are students that require more resources to get a high quality education. In terms of how we fund schools, so there are multiple sources of funds. The federal government, American Rescue Plan notwithstanding, is not one of the major contributors. They do contribute, but a majority of public education funds are state funds. Over the last few years, Nevada changed its funding mechanism. And Annette, you probably would do well to avoid a whole series of out in front with Annette's on the topic of the new school funding plan. But I think the takeaway point for this conversation on the new funding mechanism is that while the mechanism was changed in Nevada, the level of funding really wasn't. And in the last legislative session, while legislators were congratulating themselves for historic and record levels of education funding, we took a look at the actual budget language and saw that per pupil spending in Nevada in the current fiscal year actually decreased by $115 per kid from last fiscal year. And now take a look at inflation with the increased costs that are hitting everybody, us obviously, but also school districts trying to run schools. I think inflation's at 8.7% for Western states. The financial situation at school districts is quite dire.
Yes, it is. And yes, we could do an entire series on this where you and I just rage about public education all day. I could go all day with you. So this week we put out a report with Americans for Tax Fairness and HCAN, where we highlighted how much richer Nevada billionaires have gotten during this pandemic. And Nevada billionaires made $33.6 billion with a B billion dollars during the pandemic since March of 2020 alone. How would taxing their wealth help out things like education programs, roads, healthcare in our state, which is abysmal, mental health programs, which is abysmal, all of the things that are abysmal in our state? How would taxing their wealth help contribute to that? And also, it can't just be a one size fits all in Nevada. What other revenue sources do we need to be thinking about? Because we need to diversify our economy here.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, while Nevada doesn't fund education, Nevada does a pretty good job at studying it. And last year, the Commission on School Funding, which was created when they developed a new funding plan, they published their preliminary recommendations. And they did a study of what it would take to reach an adequate level of funding of public education in the state. And they figured that it would take about an additional investment of $2 billion per year. And they tried to kind of soft pedal that number because, it's seemingly a very large number, right? So they're like, well, maybe we could increase it by $200 million a year each year for 10 years to get to the $2 billion that we need. But hey, it's way easier, Annette, for me just to listen to you ask this question. And if Nevada billionaires are going to make $33.6 billion during the pandemic, wouldn't it be nice if Nevada's wealth, or at least in part, went to our kids and schools and those other services that you mentioned, and not just to pad the pockets of a handful of billionaires? Then we could have decent schools and nice things that I know that we all work for. In terms of state revenue, look, we'll hear from Ben on the efforts around the mining tax and heroic efforts to just kind of scratch the surface on that. We have gaming in the state. Nevada doesn't have an income tax. Our sales tax is high. Our property tax, though, is very low compared to other states, and property taxes prop up public education funding in many states. So, you take a look at, wealth tax, millionaires, income tax, taxes on things like gaming, mining. The money is there in Nevada. We would just have to tap it.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of tapping it. It's also a matter of having the political will for our elected officials to actually do something about it. So
I said tap it, and I was thinking it's not that easy.
No,
but that's Ben's part.
I mean, you and I and Ben would do it tomorrow, but we also have the political will to make things happen. So there's that. Ben, let's bring you in on that note. And Chris, I'm going to come back to you. So last legislative session, many of us on this call, along with our friends over at Plan, worked very hard on getting mining corporations to pay higher taxes for the first time in Nevada history. Talk to us about that and why it was so important for that to be passed, but also, there's still a lot of work to be done there. I know mining loves to lift up that, they're just saving education and it's going to be so amazing, but they can do more. So let's talk about that.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Plan because they had been working on this for decades. And if it wasn't for their years of advocacy and work and organizing around this, we wouldn't have been able to get this passed. And a little bit of context on it, the original draft of the Nevada Constitution was rejected originally because the mining corporations didn't like that it was there, they weren't included in there to have their sweetheart deal in it. And because of that, and because of how long Nevada and mining has been intertwined within our history, we have kept, or the state has kept their taxes significantly low. What the bill that Annette is talking about is AB 495. What it did was it created a new excise tax on gold and silver mining companies that are grossing more than $20 million in revenue annually. And so, and it's only a specific amount, and it's a tiered system. It's barely even 1.7% at the highest. And it's one of those instances where we're not even making sure that they're paying their fair share, what they owe. During the pandemic, the cost of gold significantly increased. And because of that, those mining corporations were making so much more money than they had been in years. And so it's not just Nevada billionaires. And I do remember, I think Battle in Progress put out some tweets during the pandemic as well, highlighting how mining just kept getting more and more and more revenue because of how high the gold prices were. And there's still so much more. The mining is one of the only taxes or corporations and industries that's singled out and has been singled out since the founding of our nation, our states, and since even before the founding of our state. And so we need to make sure that we're looking at other industries that can be paying more than what they owe, rather than just having it be on the backs of Nevadans.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. So for those at home who don't necessarily understand our tax structure in Nevada, obviously we don't have an income tax, so we don't pay that. Our property taxes are relatively low in comparison to other states, and now housing prices are out of control here. You also have corporations like mining who actually helped write the Constitution of the state of Nevada. That's why they were written out of the Constitution, is they singled themselves out because they helped write it and have enjoyed a sweetheart deal since the very beginning of this state in 1864. And now we see that they still don't want to pay their fair share. And they made, a lot like Chris said earlier, they were really patting themselves on the back that they just did such a great job. And look, something is better than nothing in this case. And I'm glad they're doing something finally, like, thank goodness. And thank goodness for Plan's advocacy, like you said, because that's the only reason why we got something. But for me, when I hear the mining lobbyists out there patting themselves on the back about how they're saving education while 2 of their mines went under, which I also don't believe, because of this, because they're not even paying into this yet. And this hasn't even started yet because there was like a 3-year ramp on it, I believe. It's so kind of pathetic to me that this is the narrative in our state, when literally we have teachers and office managers like my mom buying their own supplies, buying toilet paper for their kids in these schools. And we don't have money for the basic necessities in this state. And we're just collecting couch pennies to get by in this state. So talk to us about where we need to go in terms of diversifying our economy in the future, and some of the work we've been doing with the Revenue Coalition to think about that.
Absolutely. So I think Chris and NJ kind of brought it up a little bit, but Nevada is one of the most regressive states when it comes to taxes. And that means that the lower percentage of income earners are paying a high percentage of what taxes in the state. Or they're paying a significantly higher rate. And so one of the ways that we can make sure that we actually take care of that and make sure that, those who actually are making the money or have their wealth in the state, making sure that we're able to make sure they're paying their fair share in what they owe, Some of the things that we're looking at possibly doing here in the state is also implementing a state level wealth tax, not income tax, wealth tax, and making sure that those who the ultra rich who are here in Nevada are paying their share. We're also looking at property taxes. In our state constitution, there's depreciation, which means that how much you pay in income tax is depreciated by a certain percentage every year up until 50 years, or up to a certain amount. If we get rid of that depreciation, then we can make sure that our schools, our local governments, our fire departments, everything that is required or that receive money from the property tax at the local level, they get the money that they need to make sure that those services are actually going to the communities that need it. We're also looking at the caps on property taxes. If there's another a recession or another housing market fall, if we set a floor there, that way we're not having to go back to significantly even lower property tax revenues. There's other ways that we can make sure that we're diversifying, we're modernizing our tax base, digital goods and services, those who actually could afford it, buying songs, anything digital that, normally that if you actually buy like a record, you pay taxes on that. An album, you pay taxes on that. You buy an album on iTunes, you don't pay taxes on that. So making sure that, we modernize that. Some of the other things that we're looking at is also taxing ad revenue. There's other states that have started looking at this. Maryland started passed the bill this past legislative session or their legislative session, and they're starting to look at the implementation, as well as one thing that I don't know why, but I want to look at significantly, make sure that we take a look at this. It's and pardon my French, literally, it pied à terre, I think is what it's pronounced, but it's basically vacant homes that are used as vacation homes. And we see that up. I'm from Northern Nevada. We see that a lot up at the lake, at Lake Tahoe. I'm sure we see it down in Vegas a lot on the Strip. A lot of those condos, I'm pretty sure, are vacant from all these oligarchs, all these other billionaires from out of the country coming in, just using those as vacation homes. And so making sure that we are able to tax those at slightly higher rate. So, it helps offset as well some of the housing crisis that we're experiencing, as well as all the other services that we do need to make sure that they're funded.
And Ben, I think it's really important to talk about, before I go back to MJ, in Nevada, you said this when you opened, our tax structure is incredibly regressive. And I don't know that a lot of folks know what a regressive tax structure means. So basically that means that the poorest among us bear the burden of the basically brunt of paying taxes in our state, because our sales tax is so high. There's all kinds of other taxes on goods and services and things like that, that disproportionately impacts poor people, but the richest among us, the people who have the most wealth among us, are not paying for the things that they're buying. So like those luxury goods you were talking about, or some of the, homes that they're buying that are, multi-million-dollar homes. So talk to us about, how do we move away from a regressive tax structure in the state of Nevada and to one that is more fair and equitable for everyone?
Absolutely. So it's a little bit difficult because we got to make sure that any new tax that we do pass, that again, it's not on the backs of Nevadans. And so we make sure that, businesses and corporations that are bringing in a significantly high revenue, that they're paying their fair share, what they owe. That way, the funding that goes into that general fund, to our state budget, they're paying a larger portion of that into it. Making sure that, just across the board, anything we identify anywhere where individuals, corporations that are making significantly more, where they're not paying anything at all. We have our business tax, we have our commerce tax. Let's take a look at those again to see how we can make sure that those who are earning even more can pay more into that. There's many ways that we could try to do that to make sure that our Nevadans who are making less than $20,000 or even more or even less aren't paying a significant portion of or making up a significant portion of our state's budget.
Thank you for that, Ben. And just a reminder for those of you at home, if you have questions for our guests tonight, please put them in the chat. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I have a whole lot to say on this issue. So please put all your questions in the chat. We will definitely get to them in just a few minutes. Our team is putting them in the chat for us on Twitch, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. So any of the channels that you're on, make sure you're asking questions, but also make sure that you are sharing this on all of your social media pages so others can join the conversation as well. MJ, I want to come back to you for a moment. You know, what kind of laws currently exist that allow for these billionaires and corporations to be able to avoid paying taxes? And we can talk about this, you know, we were just talking about the local level, but obviously this is happening on the federal level as well. So how are folks getting around paying taxes like the rest of us?
The tax code is really riddled with all kinds of loopholes. So I would say there's kind of two big categories. One is the Trump tax law that passed in 2017 made some pretty significant changes to tax law. So for instance, under the law, the old law, corporations were supposed to be paying 35% tax, big corporations. And just, you know, mind you, in last year in 2020, over 50 big corporations, these are corporations that you'll know like FedEx and Boeing, didn't pay any tax at all, right? So imagine that. FedEx, which made a killing really during the pandemic because nobody could leave their houses and everybody was having stuff delivered everywhere, they paid zero. Their effective tax rate was zero. So, you know, the tax rate used to be 35% for corporations. Under the Trump tax law, it was reduced down to 21%. So that's a big loss of revenue. You know, and the same thing happened in the individual tax code where tax rates on individuals were also reduced. But one of the things is sometimes people look at the tax rate, like a lot of people have said to me, 35% taxes, my God, that's really high. Maybe not really compared to other countries that are similar to the United States. But the truth is very few corporations are actually paying at that rate, because if you're a large corporation, a whole bunch of stuff that you are using for your business can get written off. If you're a pass-through business, you don't pay business tax. And, you know, I'll just give an example from an industry that we deal with a lot when we're working with Battle Born. That's the prescription drug industry. So the prescription drug industry writes off everything. And because they write off everything as a business deduction, they actually end up paying very little in taxes, which is like one of the reasons why they're the most profitable industry in America. So for instance, if you're like flipping through TV late at night and you see all those drug ads, those are a write-off for them. Right. So they use that to reduce their tax bill. All of the money that they use for research and development, it's a tax write-off. CEO pay, business expense, it's a write-off. So you can see corporations have all these different ways that they can reduce their tax burden and really avoid paying taxes. And for individuals, it's the same. The really big one that we have for individuals is the one that I mentioned before, this tax loophole that essentially, you know, the capital gains loophole, which essentially allows people to increase their wealth through their stock holdings and not pay any taxes because wealth is not taxed the way work income is taxed. And so, you know, a lot of the work that we've done over the last couple of years has been to really raise this issue with lawmakers. Why can't we tax wealth more like work? We ought to, right? That's the source of income in a lot of ways for wealthy people. We should be taxing and collecting taxes when they increase their wealth. But the number of tax, you already, you know, the colleagues in Nevada are talking about the tax system there. We have these two layers. We have this kind of like Swiss cheese tax system at the federal level, which, by the way, even the tax law that we have for rich people and wealthy corporations, it's very rarely enforced in the way that we should, because IRS has been really underfunded for a long time. So IRS doesn't even have really the manpower to pursue all of these loopholes. That's been another issue. So you have IRS enforcement, you have the Swiss cheese at the federal level, and then every state has its own set of rules. And at the state level, there's of course tons of things that you can do to game the system, as we just heard from Benjamin. So, I think it does go back a lot to political will, right? Like, can this be fixed? Of course, anything can be fixed. It's just a question of whether or not lawmakers want to get serious. There's really no logical reason why we can't measure wealth in this country. There's not, right? I mean, we could measure wealth. We could stop things like tax dodging, right? Like, we could prohibit people or penalize people when they open up offshore accounts, right? Other countries have done that. Ireland has done that, right? So, but we haven't done any of those things because wealthy people have been able to really keep this pretty rigged up. And in many ways, they have done that through their political influence with key decision makers in Congress and in states.
Okay, so we heard two of our congressional members this week, Congresswoman Titus and Congressman Horsford, as I said at the beginning of the show, did a press conference with us, supported the legislation that President Biden has put forward around taxes and taxing billionaires and making rich folks pay their fair share. So we know some of our delegation is moving in the right direction on this and is starting to support it. So how do we start to build towards a more equitable tax system where everyone pays what they owe and everybody pays their fair share? And how do we move legislators, elected officials, our congressional members, our senators in the right direction, both at the state level and the federal level, to get this done?
Is that for me? Yes. I love it when lawmakers do the right thing, and when lawmakers are in the right place and they do the right things. And we might feel like these are some pretty darn common sense things, but Washington D.C. is a weird place. The U.S. Senate, nuts. Like, it's really not a place I would ever want to work, to be honest, to talk about hostile workplace. But so when these legislators step up as champions, as Senator Wyden has done, as President Biden has done, I think it's really important to show our support and to high five them and say, yeah, that's what we need. I'm for that. I'm for that. I'm for that. And legislators, I think, really need to hear that. I think that's why it's important that you have groups like Battleborn and NEA and Plan and Faith in Nevada, all of your groups doing advocacy to signal to your lawmakers that you are behind them and to help them make that case. Because oftentimes when they come up here to DC and they're saying to colleagues that are more centrist or to Republicans, hey, this is what my constituents want, they need to then be able to point to the clamor in your state, right? They need to be able to tell the story about the educator that's got 3 kids of their own and is collecting a BS salary and can't send their own kids to college, or the nursing assistant who's funded with Medicaid that hasn't had a raise for 10 years or whatever it is. So I think, one, when we see legislators finally, after 40 years, doing the right thing on this issue, we ought to promote that and we ought to high five them. We ought to support them. And then I think, we'd have to do a lot of education with people about why this issue is important, what's at stake for them. Like when we're in DC talking about this issue and people are going on and on and on about revenue, and it's like the whole pocket protector crowd, like nobody in America understands what that's about. What people in the United States understand is what are the things that are important to them that tax dollars support, right? Education, healthcare, public safety, roads, all of those things. So I think the education is important. And then the third thing is, I think it's important to hold opponents of tax policy that would create a more fair tax system accountable, right? It's an election year. We're going into an election. It's important for people to understand, really, everybody in an election year, as you guys know, is going to claim to be the party of the working class. They're all going to be for everything. They're going to, support this, that, and the other thing. And the truth is, I think we have to look at lawmakers' records on this issue. It's pretty easy. Look who voted for the Trump tax cuts. Because, by the way, the people that voted for the Trump tax cuts are the same people that voted to pay for it with $400 billion in cuts to healthcare. So I just think it's, there's no magic to it. It's the grueling work of organizing that we do all the time to really help regular folks who are going to be the ones who, for one moment in December, they're going to be the decision makers. Now is the time to really help people understand what's at stake. And, I'll just say one thing about healthcare that I think is important that I think folks don't realize. During the pandemic, I think we have to give lawmakers credit, and we have to kind of do this in a bipartisan way, because there were very good packages that passed that really quickly helped get people insured after they lost their jobs. They expanded Medicaid. They stopped governors from cutting people off of Medicaid. All that good stuff. The Affordable Care Act got much more affordable because of more help for both upper income families and lower income families. All that stuff is great stuff, but it's not permanent stuff. Right? So like many of those provisions will expire at the end of this year if Congress does not pass legislation. And when they pass that legislation, they are going to need to pay for it, because there is nobody in Washington, D.C. today that is in the mood to pass legislation that is not paid for. So the tax piece of this, whatever issue you care about, if it's education, if it's care jobs, if it's roads, if it's public safety, there is no avenue to securing those services and goods for people without revenue, without taxing the rich and corporations. We should feel very optimistic. We live in a super rich country. This isn't the richest country in the world anymore, but we still have more billionaires than anybody else in the world. So there is really no reason on earth why we can't have all of the things that we need, why everybody can't have the basics. We should feel very confident that that's in fact possible, and we should insist, with our champions and with opponents, that that's their responsibility, is to deliver that for people.
MJ, one of the things that Congressman Horsford reminded folks during our press conference on Monday, and if y'all watching at home have not seen the press conference, we'll put a link to it in our chat so you can go back and watch it. It was excellent. Congresswoman Titus, Congressman Horsford did an excellent job explaining why we should move these measures, and exactly what MJ is saying. They are champions and we should be celebrating this. But this week I read a prominent pollster for many Democrats say Democrats historically have been so used to running away from taxes as a policy issue because we don't, or they don't, I should say, because I am a progressive, they don't want to be labeled as a tax and spend liberal. And nowadays, people understand you actually need to pay taxes to have nice things, and that people, voters, are smarter than that and are starting to wise up to the fact that the ultra rich and their lobbyists are not paying their fair share compared to the rest of us. So why do you believe, and I believe that pollster is 100% right, but why do you believe that this is the time for Democrats to lean in on this issue and take this issue on, especially at a time like this when we're seeing so much inequality?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it never helps Democrats to try to be somebody else, right? It's like, it's really not believable to folks. Like, we should, Democrats should be who we are. We support public education. We support healthcare for all. We support a progressive tax system in which people pay according to their means. And we support that for everybody, not just middle-class people, but also super rich people. So, I'm sort of, I've been in DC for a long time, but I'm sort of we should go with truth as a tactic. Like those are all the things that we're for. Here's the good news. Like, most people in America are actually for those things too, right? Like, most people in America are for those things. There is no reason today for Democrats to run away from taxes. President Biden got elected both in terms of the popular vote and the electoral vote. And the number one issue that he spent advertising money on was taxing the rich, right? He spent more money on ads about taxing the rich than he did any other issue. Every poll that we've seen, and not just from Democratic pollsters, from Republican pollsters, from middle of the road pollsters, tells us that not only do Democrats agree with us, not only do independents agree with us, but frankly, a fair number of working class Republicans agree with us on this issue. So there's really no, I always feel like Democrats who are sort of, hand wringing, oh my God, like, can we talk about this? Then people are going to view us as tax and spend liberals. I think they're sort of like living in the 80s, and they maybe should get out a little bit more, because that's not where the American public is right now. Where the American public is right now is, almost $5 a gallon for gas in some places, healthcare that they can't afford, 5% mortgage rates, right? People are in a very transactional mood, and there is a lot of appetite for this policy, right? And so the time to do it is now, while Democrats actually have 50 votes in the Senate to pass an increase in taxes on the rich and corporations, which is a little bit like Haley's Comet moment, right? It's kind of a magical moment. We don't always, there's many, many, many things that are important things that we don't have 50 votes for. Taxes is not one of them. Joe Manchin supports these policies. He supports taxing the rich. He supports taxing corporations. So, I just think while we have 50 votes, Democrats should go for it. And I personally do not believe that voters are going to forgive Democrats for, kind of flaking out on this. There's no excuse to be flaky on this. The other thing that I think is important that we hear all the time from the pollsters we work with at Hart and Anzalone is, Democrats are going to be attacked on taxes no matter what. How do we know? They have been for 30 years. There's not going to be anything new. Democrats are going to be attacked on taxes. So given that you're going to be attacked on taxes, you should make peace with that and be ready, right? If you know that you're going to go into a knife fight, don't bring a teddy bear, right? Get in there and have the fight. If we actually are committed to having the fight, we're going to win it. Most people in America are with us on this.
Listen, I'm always ready to have the knife fight, but like getting the Democrats to go and have a knife fight alongside me, that's usually the problem. Okay, Chris, speaking of knife fights and the things we enjoy, so as billionaires have continued to expand their wealth here in Nevada and all across the country, the folks you represent, educators, are, struggling to keep up with the rising costs and pressure from the media, politicians. How can we support educators right now? And what should we be thinking about nationwide, but also here in Nevada for people like our educators?
Yeah, I think the Battleborn tweet with me in it on this program has something to do with knives as well. So it's perfect. Look, right now with COVID, with the last 2 years of the pandemic, the situation in schools is dire. I'm not sure another way to put it. There is an unprecedented shortage of educators, thousands of vacant educator positions. It's getting discussed right now at the State Board of Education. Schools, I think the anecdotal evidence is clear. Schools are less safe. We've had some horrific incidents here in the Clark County School District of violence in the classroom. And we know that it's harder for educators, and everybody who's working class. And by the way, educators are generally working class and support progressive taxation. Our members get it. But it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet. I know that Ben's doing a lot of work up north on housing affordability, and we've seen rents up, close to 25% over the last year. Hearing stories of new teachers coming to work in the district, but not having the ability to find a place to live. So the situation is dire. And that's why in NSCA we've launched the Time for 20 campaign. And I think an interesting point that was made earlier about how to talk about taxes. I often like to work taxes in as kind of an answer, not as the lead in. But Time for 20 would help address this crisis in Nevada schools. It means a 20% increase in wages for educators. The state of New Mexico this year just did a 20% increase for educators. It means that support professionals, some of whom are making as little as $10 or $11 an hour, and struggling on these poverty wages, they should be making at least $20 an hour. I know that a lot of the private sector businesses are now offering $20 an hour in terms of starting wages. And Time for 20 also means addressing that issue of class sizes in our state. We have the largest class sizes in the country, and Time for 20 is calling for an average class size of 20 kids per classroom. This would provide for a better education. It would allow for more differentiated instruction and competency-based learning. Would improve school climate and culture and make schools, less unsafe. We pitched this Time for 20 campaign, and I think Nevadans get it. And we saw some polling this morning that Nevadans generally are supportive of educators getting a raise. But we, talked about time for 20, even to Democratic leaders, and they say, it sounds great. How are you going to pay for it? Because, clearly it would have a significant price tag. Well, the answer is with progressive taxation, right? So again, two sides of the same coin. We have a real crisis in Nevada schools that affects a lot of people, that a lot of people care about, that there's kind of a consensus, even a strange bipartisan consensus, that more needs to be done in terms of investing in schools, investing in kids and educators. But then you have a total breakdown, and it's not just a partisan breakdown on taxation. And so for us, the approach is to say, look, Senator Wyden and President Biden are proposing taxing billionaires. Why not move a wealth tax or some sort of capital gains tax or some sort of millionaires tax here in Nevada alongside it, so that we can address real crises that our communities and Nevada families are facing.
So, Chris, what is the likelihood of our legislators getting that done next year? And what do we got to do to make sure that we push them to get that done?
Well, the likelihood of the current crop of legislators getting it done seems low. They would more likely, maybe entertain some sort of half compromise type of measure. But we have an election between now and the next legislative session, and we have the ability. There's a June 14th primary, and then the general in I think it's November 8th. Is that right? This year, kind of focused on the June 14th primary. We have the ability to elect actual champions, people that are going to go and fight. We have a candidate running up north who basically launched two candidates up north that basically launched the Time for 20 campaign. We have the ability to elect them and go and sort of change some of these dynamics, right? Go get our own in the legislature, win some elections, and then see how far we can get down the road to actually taxing the billionaires and millionaires.
From your mouth to the goddess's ears, Chris. All right, Ben, I want to bring you back in for this as well, and then we'll get to some audience questions really quickly. So what have you learned from organizing in communities, especially up north, about how regular voters understand tax issues? And how do we better communicate the need for the wealthy to pay what they owe and their fair share?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely a disconnect oftentimes when it comes to, what's actually being paid into it and what folks are actually using. And what the services that folks are actually benefiting from. And so when we talk to them, we often hear, oh, I'm, rental services or rental assistance or anything else, trying to let them know whatever issues that you're caring about, that's coming from revenue, that's coming from this. And we're not getting enough here in the state. And folks are trying to understand that. They still fear the fact that, if we raise the taxes on the rich, or my tax is going to go up. No, what we're trying to do is making sure that everyone pays what they owe and making sure that people are paying their fair share, and that those who actually aren't making that much don't have to pay as much as at higher rates as others. And so just making sure that we're talking to them saying, if you're on Medicare, Medicaid, when you're going to the doctor, that reimbursement that they're getting from the government, if we have more funding to be able to pay for that, that means more doctors. You'll be able to see more doctors who will accept Medicare and Medicaid. We got to make sure that, the schools that your kids are going to, or the university that you or your kids are going to, get the services and the funding that they need to be able to actually provide a quality education that all of our kids deserve. And so just making sure that we're making those connections with the issues that they care about. It's always tied to revenue, housing, making sure that, the governor just, or the governor and the legislature just passed the initial $250 million for affordable housing. That money came from the ARPA funds. We can do even more if we have the revenue in our state. We can make sure that our schools are properly funded. We can make sure that healthcare is extremely affordable for everyone in our state. We just need to make sure that we're making that connection with voters, that if we have the revenue needed, the services that they want to actually have will be funded.
All right. Thank you for that, Ben. All right. Let's get to a couple audience questions because I think they're super important tonight. So we're actually going to start with some of the newer ones that just came in. MJ, I'm going to start with you on this. This is a question from one of our viewers, Richard. He asked, didn't Sinema and Manchin, as well as a couple of representatives in New Jersey, torpedo tax increases for billionaires and corporations previously?
So there have been different iterations of tax proposals. And so in the sort of beginning of this debate last year in the first reconciliation package, a lot of the revenue increases that were proposed were President Biden's proposals, essentially to roll back pieces of the TJCA, the tax cuts, the Trump tax law. So yes, we have gotten opposition. We don't have opposition on the concept that we need to do more to tax the rich and corporations. Where we have opposition or lack of consensus among Democrats is what is the specific policy that needs to happen. But even people like Manchin, when you hear Manchin at home in West Virginia on the radio, he very frequently says, we can address the deficit. We can fund a bunch of these services. We can do X, Y, and Z things. We should roll back the Trump tax cuts. Senator Sinema doesn't want to roll back the Trump tax cuts. But every member of the Senate who wants to get a reconciliation package done, which is everybody who wants to get a reconciliation package done, also is going to need to pay for it. So they're going to have to come to an agreement on some kind of pay for. So the issue is not whether people support taxing the rich and corporations. They all do. The exact mechanism, to what degree, whether it's got anything to do with the Trump tax law, that's what's going to get debated.
Thank you for that, MJ. All right, Chris, I want to come to you. Manuel asks, how do we push Time for 20 without it getting hijacked by school privatization groups, which we are seeing the voucher scheme rearing its ugly head again here in Nevada? So how do we do it without it getting hijacked by school privatization groups or allowing them to muddy our message?
Well, I mean, look, I think some of us here on this out in front have worked to take on the privatizers. We've had a pretty kind of simple call that public money should stay in public schools. And so, when we're talking about Time for 20, we're talking about, Nevada's public education system. It's the system that educates 90% of Nevada's kids. Public schools are open to everyone, and for folks who want to send their kids to private schools, they can pay for that. And so, I don't have data about, private school teachers' pay and that sort of thing, but market forces that are hitting public schools likely are going to be hitting private schools as well. And so, if we fight for what the public education system needs in Nevada, if we're able to deliver it, then public education is a more viable option for all Nevada families and kids. One of the things we've seen, the voucher folks and the private school people do is kind of push this agenda of austerity on public education, which, then you get school systems in decline and increasing numbers of people looking for, those other options, whether they be charters or private school vouchers. And so the best way actually to guard against vouchers is to make the public schools a good choice. And it would pretty much take 90% of the air out of the private school kind of voucher movement.
Thank you for that, Chris. All right, Ben, I'm gonna say this question exactly how Sarah, our viewer, wrote it. Is there a future in which our politicians sack up or decide to tax gaming or resorts in a better way? Go ahead, Ben.
Honestly, it comes down to public pressure and rallying behind the issues, the services that you need. Every time we go, they're tired of hearing from me, from Chris, from Annette, from some of our partners. But it's hard for them to say no, and it's hard for them to vote against things when it's an actual, not saying that we're not actual Nevadans, but actual everyday Nevadans showing up to their office, showing up to the committee room, being there when they start going on their rants or their soapboxes. So if there's an issue that you care about, housing, if it's education, healthcare, what have you. And I've said this I think every single time I've come on Out in Front or anytime I've come up with Battle in Progress, there's an organization that works on that issue. Join them. They'll take you to Carson City. They'll help you find your voice so you can tell that legislator, you can tell that elected official, hey, and to quote the question, sack up. Make sure that you're actually doing what is needed for me, for my family, for Nevadans. Raise revenue. That's the only way we're going to be able to do it. If we keep doing that, keep putting that pressure on them every single time, they're going to keep kicking the can down the road like they have for years and years and years if we don't start doing that. So we need more people to start showing up and actually demanding it, because that's what we want as Nevadans. That's what Nevadans need.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, MJ, I'm going to come back to you for this one because I love this question and I think you'll have a sassy answer for it. Maria, of course, asked it because we got this from one of the right wingers this week, and I just think it's the most ridiculous thing on earth. Is Elon Musk actually a self-made man, or is that fake news?
Look, what is Elon Musk known for, right? He's known for Tesla. Tesla is a brand of car. If nobody bought that car, would anybody know who Elon Musk is? I don't think so. So, Elon Musk is a smart guy, whatever. He's got his company, he does his thing. Nobody objects. This is the United States of America, right? Like, people are walking around with iPhones, they've got flat screens. Like, people in this country don't object to wealth. That's not the issue. The issue is that there's got to be some systemic way that establishes fairness. And there's got to be a commitment that wealthy people are not living by a different set of rules than the rest of us, right? Because if wealthy people, think about this, in countries where people who are super wealthy and have dynastic wealth make the rules and live by a separate set of rules, we call those countries monarchies. In a democracy, that's not the way it's supposed to work. The way it's supposed to work is that there is going to be equal opportunity for people to prosper, to do well, sell their wares, make their money, and they are going to contribute back into the system. So, from my point of view, it's less about vilifying, Elon Musk, or I see a lot of stuff about Warren Buffett too. Warren Buffett is a billionaire who actually, early in the tax debate years ago, when I first started working on taxes 10 years ago, he was famous for saying, why does my secretary pay more taxes than I do? Right? He's been an advocate actually for progressive taxation. And there's lots of organizations, Patriotic Millionaires and others, lots of wealthy people that in fact agree, right? They think that wealthy people should pay their fair share, that there's an obligation. And their ideology is actually that rich people do better in a society where you have better educated people, where you have public safety, where you have all of these various things. So, do I think Elon Musk is a self-made man? No, I don't think there are any self-made men, because I think generally people prosper in a community where other people are participating and buoying them up.
Absolutely. Okay, MJ, I'm going to come back to you, and then Chris, I got one more for you. So I think this is a really important one, especially with this person coming to Nevada next week to troll around with our favorite Lord Farquaad, Adam Laxalt. So Governor DeSantis in Florida revoked a special tax municipality status for Disney World because they criticize, and rightfully so, the Don't Say Gay bill. His bigoted reasoning aside, what does this mean for the tax reform debate as we move forward? So I'm going to ask you that.
I don't know, actually. I mean, I think that, so I think it's interesting. So one, overall, I think it's good that there is a tax debate. So while I sometimes will view some of the things that people do on taxes as being a little bit like out there and crazy, I think in general, the fact that there's a live tax debate in this country is overall a good thing. And it's a good thing for a lot of reasons. But one of the big ones was the one that Benjamin was talking about earlier, which is it's an opportunity to talk to regular people about this issue and to connect it to everything that they care about. So, I think it's also interesting that DeSantis made that move because, he's a real contender for the next presidential, right? And so the way I know, believe me, I spend a lot of time in Florida and a lot of time in Orlando and a lot of time on flights with kids going to Disney. I do not find any of that to be magical, by the way. But, it is, he's a real contender. So understanding sort of what his position is going to be on taxes is going to be really critical, because I believe that taxes is going to be one of the central issues, along with things like crime and public safety and healthcare in the upcoming couple elections that are going to really define people's positions. So I think it was kind of an interesting move to watch him use the tax break as a way to punish his political opponents. I don't think he really scored himself many points. My observation over the years working in Florida is, people that are mean to Disney don't seem to do very well. That's just been my that's been my observation.
I just feel like if Florida does something, we should literally do the opposite of it. That's just like my rule of life. Chris, I want to kind of close it out with this one, and then we'll do some final thoughts from all of you. Shelby asks, how can we ensure that even if the rich are paying their fair share of taxes, especially here in Nevada, that money will go to our schools? And I know this is a conversation you and I have had a lot, because oftentimes they'll just play, chess with the money and move some money from the distributive schools account, or whatever we're calling it these days. And they'll just move that money out to supplant it with other money, right? And so how do we make sure that we're not supplanting money, that we're actually adding more money to the DSA and making sure that our schools get even more money in the future?
So ironically, or maybe not ironically, the main purpose of switching to the new funding formula was to deal with this issue of the shell game of education funding. So with the law as it's currently written, if additional revenues come in to the state, the public education system, sort of through formula, this is maybe an oversimplification, but through formula, the public education system will get their percentage of that. I think that the big question, or the big part of the question, is if we can get the wealthy to actually pay in and raise these revenues. That's the tricky part. Making sure that the funds get to where they need to go. We actually have better mechanisms for doing that, not just in the law, but with accountability and advocacy and pressure at the legislature. Those are simple majority votes that sometimes we can win.
All right, thank you for that. And I know Educate Nevada now has a really great ad out on supplanting money right now on YouTube. So if y'all haven't seen it yet, go check that out, because it educates people on how the legislature does move money around just as a shell game right now, and how we have to change that. All right. So, Ben, I'm going to start with you. Closing thoughts on the revenue conversation, why we should be doing better, both in the state of Nevada and nationally, and how folks get involved with the good work that you're doing in the North.
Absolutely. I think it just boils down. We need to make sure that millionaires, billionaires, corporations that are nowhere near paying their fair share than what they actually do owe, we need to make sure that they're paying it, and not just a little bit. We need to make sure that it's coming in to help everyday Nevadans and people across the country, because we've seen 2 years of suffering. We're just going to keep suffering if we don't bring in more revenue for what we need. And so if that's something you care about, we're fighting for here at Faith in Action Nevada for a more equitable and just Nevada for all, so they could thrive. And if you want to join us, up here in the North, down south in Vegas, find us on Facebook, on Twitter. I believe our Twitter handle is at FIA Nevada, or else I will drop it into the chat in the Facebook. You could follow me. You could follow us on Facebook. Our website is faithinactionnevada.org. We have an issue that you care about. If we don't, we have other partner organizations that are there with us, that are fighting along with us on this revenue fight, and we're not going to stop until we actually see more revenue coming in for everyday Nevadans.
Thank you for that, Ben. And we will be putting all kinds of good stuff in the chats just here coming up as we're doing closing remarks. So we'll put the link to Ben's group, Faith in Action, so you all can get in touch with them, as well as the other groups who are on the out in front tonight with us. And then we will also put a link for the press conference we did on Monday with Congresswoman Titus and Congressman Horsford, so y'all can go back and watch that, because it was a really great press conference on the Billionaires Report that we put out on Monday on tax day, because Monday was tax day, and that's why we're doing this whole thing. And then in addition to that, we are also going to put the report that we put out this week on how Nevada billionaires got richer by $33.6 billion during the pandemic, like Ben was just saying, while the rest of us were struggling to pay bills. So make sure you take a look at that stuff in the chat, because there's going to be a lot of great information in those links that we're going to be sharing, but also get in touch with these groups and get involved with the work that they're doing. Chris, final thoughts as we wrap up tonight, and final thoughts on just overall the revenue conversation as we move forward.
Not really final thoughts, nothing prophetic, but when we're talking about progressive taxation, we're actually talking about taking money from wealthy people and redistributing it to communities and folks who need it, whether that's schools or health services, human services, those things. And so it doesn't happen without a fight. And so we just need to know that we have to keep at it. That means educate, agitate, organize, mobilize, and do it as smart, as effective as we can in elections, at the legislature, through our digital channels, at our work sites, that are, with family members, socially, like it's on 24/7. And that's kind of, what it's going to take in order to make progress. Although I will say that what Margarita was saying around the president including a wealth tax in his budget proposal, that was significant. And we use a marker like that and build on it.
Absolutely. And Chris, how do folks get involved with the Time for 20 campaign and the good work that y'all are doing at NSCA?
I don't know, Annette, but if folks are watching this, there's no way they can avoid, our social media presence with Time for 20. So hashtag Time for 20, Twitter, Facebook, search it in the search engine, and you'll be able to find us.
Thank you for that. And MJ, the final word, bring us home, and give us some hope, I guess, going forward on this issue.
Oh, geez, hope. Okay, so no, I don't want to be that way, because even though I am a Debbie Downer on lots of things on taxes, I am very hopeful because it's taken a long time to get here, and to have President Biden run on this issue and propose really the most progressive, far-reaching policies that we have seen from a Democrat in my adult life, and I'm almost 50. Pretty big deal, right? That was a really big deal. I did not expect that. And Senator Wyden, who's the head of the Senate Finance Committee, I also didn't expect him to step up as a champion in this huge way. And I just really have to sort of high five him, right? He has been pushing it and pushing it. These are tremendously powerful people in the US Senate. So the fact that we went from just a few years ago having one champion on this issue in the House and one champion in the Senate, and now here we are with really a proliferation of champions, this is really becoming a mainstream issue. I would say, on taxes, it's such an important issue. It's a fundamental pillar of the progressive agenda, not just because we need the revenue to finance things, but because in a democracy, by definition, the people rule, right? In a democracy, we can deploy our resources to invest in the things that help create the country that we want, an equitable country where everybody actually has an opportunity, where any kid, no matter what he looks like, what country he may have come from, what language he speaks, actually is going to have a real shot at a better life. And to do that, all of that is within our reach. To do that, we need the progressive taxation, and we need to really have one set of rules for people. It's also a great issue. And I just have to say, Nevada has been a leader state in so many different ways. And as a person that has done a lot of state work and now does national work, state fights on taxes are tremendously relevant at the national level, and the national tax fight is tremendously relevant for you guys, right? Almost every state, a third of your budget, of the revenue in your budget is coming from the federal government for public education, for safety, for healthcare, right? Like all the public programs are driving funding from the feds on down. And then any reform that you do at the state level, just like so many other issues, it drives pressure upward. It takes away excuses for why we can't do better at the federal level. And we have healthcare reform because of states. We have reform on lots of CJ issues like expungement because of states. So states really do have a lot of power to force change, to build a blueprint, to take away excuses from federal lawmakers. And so it's really encouraging to see the level of organizing and support for progressive taxation in your state. And I think in terms of public education, there's no better issue to talk to people about, right? Is a deeply held value around public education. And it's a perfect way to help people understand what's at stake in the tax debate at the federal level and at the state level.
Well, MJ, that's a lot of pressure that you're putting on the state of Nevada when
you guys aren't busy, right? Like you don't have,
well, especially when we're not notoriously bad on this issue and just give Tesla and, various other companies and stadiums sweetheart deals on taxes, and then we pay for public money. It's a whole mess here. We just love paying corporations to come here. So we'll do our best, and we're going to keep lifting this issue up and holding our elected officials accountable regardless of their party, because that's all we can do. And as somebody said earlier, we're just going to all sack up and do what we got to do. Right, Ben? Ben's cracking up now. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, MJ. I know it's late for you, for coming and sharing your wisdom with us on this issue. It's MJ's favorite holiday. Tax day was this week. We wanted to cover the billionaires report, and we wanted to make sure that you all understand the issues that we're fighting for, both at the federal level and here at the state level, because we do have champions in Nevada on this issue. And so we want to make sure we continue pushing all of our elected officials to do the right thing at the state level and at the federal level to raise revenue for the services we need. So with that, I want to say thank you to our panelists tonight. Thank you to all the viewers at home who asked questions, who are participating. We will be back next week out in front at 5 o'clock on Thursday, talking about extremism in Nevada and how extremism has kind of ramped up over the past couple of years, and how that relates to racism, gun violence, all of the other different issues that we work on. So thank you again. Make sure you join us next week, Thursday at 5 p.m. Same place, same time. Talk to you all soon, everyone. Have a great evening and stay safe.